You are listening to The Hero's Journey. I'm Jeff Garvin.
And I'm Dan Zarzana.
Let the journey begin. Welcome to the show.
Willkommen.
If you are enjoying this podcast, please share it. Tell your friends, post a MySpace update, or burn a compact disc.
What?
Just please share
Put
us.
them on a mixtape.
Please share us on social media and leave us a review on the iTunes.
And thank you to everybody so far who has left a review and ratings and whatnot. We really appreciate that.
And we want to thank Cuiva in Ireland for sharing our podcast recently. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. I looked it up.
Jeff, this is episode 7, Moonlight. Not about Moonlight Graham.
No, it's not. It's not even about werewolves. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
This movie is not about werewolves. Are we still doing spoiler alerts? Is that still a thing we need to do?
I think we ought to warn people that we're about to discuss the entirety of the work.
Beginning to end.
Yeah. Moonlight was released in 2016 by A24 and Plan B. It was written and directed by Barry Jenkins based on an unpublished semi-autobiographical play by Terrell Alvin McCraney called In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue. We usually boil the cast down to a couple of key leads, but Moonlight is such an ensemble cast. Let's name as many as we can.
Agreed.
Mahershala Ali. Did you know that is the short version of his name?
Yeah.
Mahershala Hashbaz.
Yeah.
Is his full first name.
He's incredible.
Yeah, he's an amazing actor. He's on House of Cards, too, and he's really great. Janelle Monáe as Teresa. Naomi Harris as Paula. Naomi also was nominated for an Academy Award for this film.
Yeah, and a Golden Globe.
Alex R. Hibbert as Little. Ashton Sanders as Chiron. Trevante Rhodes as Black. And there's more. We'll try to name them as we go along.
Moonlight won Oscars for Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Mahershala Ali. It was also nominated for Best Actress in a Supporting Role for Naomi Harris, Best Director for Barry Jenkins, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Best Original Score. On the Golden Globe side, Moonlight won for Best Drama and was nominated for Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Score, and Best Actress in a Supporting Role for Naomi Harris. I think it's a giant crime that it didn't win for Best Director. You know, in the Oscar world, the producers win the Best Picture award.
Yeah.
And this is an auteur-level creation of a writer-director, and it should have won Best Director. It cost $4 million to make, and it grossed over $65 million worldwide. That is a massively successful independent film.
All right, so let's get into it. Act 1, Segment 1, is the world of common day, where we see our main character in his status quo normal life. Moonlight starts with Juan,
right?
Mahershala Ali. So I thought this was our main character.
Totally threw me for a loop as I'm watching the movie.
Tricked me.
Yeah.
Had I been thinking clearly, though, I would have remembered that he had won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. But then I also knew that the film takes place in 3 different periods of time of this young man's life. And I thought, okay, maybe we're seeing adult main character at this point and we'll flash back to the children. But anyway, it tricked me. So Mahershala Ali as Juan, we established that he is a drug dealer in Miami. And as Juan is checking on one of his street operatives, a group of children go sprinting by, obviously chasing somebody. They're saying, get him and knock his expletive deleted down. And they're chasing a young boy named Chiron. His peers know him as Little. He's obviously the runt of his class. They chase him into an abandoned apartment complex where he kind of barricades himself inside an empty apartment and hides until his tormentors leave him alone. And that's Little. Troubled kid. He doesn't speak. We don't hear him speak for many, many minutes in the film.
Yeah, and I would just add that part of Little's ordinary world is that his mom is an addict.
I didn't mention that because we don't know that yet.
Oh, okay.
We don't know that until halfway through the first act.
Well, I'll jump right in there and say...
The first time we see his mother, she looks put together.
Yeah, she's actually a good mom.
She's in a nurse's outfit. She's obviously worried about him because he was gone all night.
She restricts him from TV, so she's clearly got
She says, no, your TV privileges are revoked. Find something to read. So she tries to discipline him and then comforts him, and we think she's a good mother.
Yeah, at first...
It's not until later that we realize that she's addicted to crack. And
I bring it up because at first when we see Chiron interacting with her, we think there's something wrong with Chiron. His responses to her are so sort of almost like there's something cognitively going on with him or something, because he just doesn't respond to her in a normal way. And then we find out later it's because he doesn't know what he's coming home to. So I
a good point.
I included her addiction as a ordinary world because that is Chiron's ordinary world. That's where he comes from. And this kind of keys into a point that I had with my
fatherless as well. We didn't point that out. The father is not in the picture.
As is often the case with our hero in the hero's journey, there's a parent missing or both parents missing. I bring this up because my analysis of this movie was really difficult. I saw little slices of the journey throughout this movie, and they come up at different times. It's not linear. It's not even one for one. There's a lot of reflections of the hero's journey, but this is a sophisticated, unusual narrative. And so as I go into my part of the analysis, it's going to be like, oh, that doesn't happen later, but it's part of the, it's part of the journey.
I tried to follow the journey as tightly as possible. So we'll see how it goes.
The other thing that I think is important for Chiron/Little's ordinary world is that he's bullied rather severely by his classmates. As you mentioned, when he's being chased at the beginning, that's part of an ongoing experience for him. Call to adventure. The hero is presented with a challenge which renders him unable to continue living in the comfort of the ordinary world. I'm at, the second stage of the journey, and I already found this difficult to nail down. And I came up with two, and I think one is better than the other, but I think they're both important calls to adventure because they invite Little out of his comfort zone and into something bigger. Chronologically, the first one is Juan, the drug dealer, who's an immigrant from Cuba. He finds Little in that abandoned crack house where he's been hiding from his bullies. And Juan invites him out, come have a bite to eat with me. And he walks out and opens the door like, come on with me. I think that's a call to adventure.
That's exactly the call to adventure that I wrote down. So I'm on board with you there. I'm interested to hear what the second one is.
Well, I think I'm going to kind of have to talk about story out of order to support my statements here. But so Little's playing soccer with some classmates.
It's not soccer.
They're kicking around a ball that's been sort of tethered with like paper and tape. And
I have this in my tests section. Now, I don't know what kids call it now, but when you and I were kids, this game where you pick up the ball and everybody else tries to tackle you and get the ball from you, that game was called Smear the Queer.
Wow, symbolic.
Yeah, when you discover who Little and Chiron is, his internal struggle, and you see him pulling away. He's on the outskirts of that game. You see these wide shots of the kids all together in this maelstrom of young bodies fighting over the ball.
Right.
But Little is 10 yards away off to the side, and he's kind of orbiting the group of boys like a satellite, and then he ends up just walking away from the game.
His friend Kevin chases after him. So he gets into this conversation with Chiron, and he says,
why you always letting people pick on you, man?
What you mean?
You always letting them pick on you.
So, what I gotta do?
All you gotta do, show these you ain't soft.
But I ain't soft.
I know. But it don't mean nothing if they don't know.
And he shoves Chiron, he like pushes him. But it's not like an act of violence. It's almost like he's trying to coach him. And so Chiron kind of stares at him for a minute.
It's provoking him.
Yeah, and then they wrestle. And the way it was shot and the way it was edited, I'm watching this going, that's not how kids wrestle. And I watched it and I'm going, oh, there's something almost tender about this. And as we learn later in the story, there's something other than just friendship going on there. There's some tenderness that's unusual, and they're both uncomfortable with it. And of course, they get up, and they're fine. They're still friends, and they go walking off. And then they do the thing that kids do, which is they chase
just start running. Yeah. Can I just add?
Yeah, please.
Preceding that exact moment when they're walking away from the game, Little notices that Kevin is cut on his face.
Yes.
And he reaches up and he cups Kevin's face. And that's just not a gesture that young boys do. They do not hold each other's faces in their hands.
Right. It's
so that again that supports this tenderness that you're talking about.
The reason why I call this call to adventure is because arguably, for lack of a more sophisticated term, the romance or the connection, sexual and emotional connection between Chiron and Kevin is an important part of this movie. And this is that first time when these two boys connect physically. And to me, that was Chiron's first invitation into, hey, there's clearly something about you and boys that's different. He might know he's picked on and he's different, but this is that moment where he's invited to, hey, come explore this other side of yourself. Those are those two elements of call to adventure.
Yeah, okay. I put all of that in tests just because it was a test of the boys were testing Little because they would kick this ball at him to try to get him to pick it up so they could tackle him, but he would back away from it. So I put all of that as a test of, can you fit into this culture, this young male culture, and he was backing away from it.
I strongly agree that that was a test, and I think we're going to continue to have these moments in the movie where one scene contains multiple out-of-order elements of the journey.
All right, stage 3 is refusal of the call. Confronted with a fear of the unknown, the hero refuses the call. Sometimes this energy, and here's where we say energy all the time.
Energy.
Sometimes this energy is expressed from within the hero and sometimes from without. Now, we've already discussed how Juan rescues Little from his hidey hole,
Right.
takes him out to eat, and is trying to get Little to open up, talk to him, tell him what his name is, tell him where he lives so he can take him home.
Yeah.
And Little refuses to speak. Still, we're many minutes into the film and our hero has not said a word. I saw this as him refusing to engage with this person who is expressing a desire for mentorship a little bit.
Yeah.
Not quite yet,
Yeah.
but that's the road Juan is going down. And Little is backing away from that. He doesn't
Totally.
want any part of that. So that's what I saw as the refusal of the call.
I totally agree. The only other refusal of the call I wanted to point out is after Kevin pushes Little pauses for a moment. Kevin's invited him to wrestle with the push, and Little is hesitant to do it, but then he does do it. Meeting with the mentor. This is where our hero receives counsel on how to operate in the special world. Of all the scenes in the movie, I think this was the clearest.
Yeah, it sure was.
The clearest moment. It's the moment where the title comes into play. I saw this moment in trailers. This scene is one of two scenes that I think got the nomination for Mahershala Ali.
Right.
Juan takes Little to the beach and teaches him how to swim. And he tells him about his own childhood, what it was like growing up in Cuba.
This one time, I run by this old lady. I was running, hollering, cutting her food, boy. This old lady, she stopped me. She said, running around, catching a boy that light. In moonlight, black boys look blue.
And then he says,
Say your name, Blue.
At some point, you gotta decide for yourself who you gonna be. Can't let nobody make that decision for you.
The 3 acts of this film are broken up into young Chiron, teenage Chiron, and young adult Chiron. Each one is a different name. Act 1 is called Little. Act 2 is called Chiron. Act 3 is called Black. Each of these are names other people have called the main character. And I think these are the names that the main character identifies with in those particular acts. So we are seeing from start to finish the progression of this man into finally who he decides he's going to be.
well said, totally agree.
Crossing the first threshold, the hero passes a barrier to enter the special world. This crossing represents the hero's commitment to taking on the adventure. I really connected with the moment when Little has spent the night at Juan and Teresa's house. This is the first night after Juan rescues Little, takes him out to eat, takes him home. So Little spends the night because he still hasn't told Juan where he lives. So Teresa says, okay, well, you can spend the night here if you'd like, and we'll take you home in the morning. The next morning, we see Little in the bed. His shirt looks pristine white. He's on these two huge fluffy white pillows that look like they're as big as him. In the background, there are some white lace curtains that are fluttering gently in the breeze. It's this heavenly shot. And at first, Little's back is to us, and then he rolls over in his sleep, and his face is so peaceful.
Yeah.
To me, this was the moment where Little feels at home. It's an acceptance and an appreciation of the pseudo-family life that Juan and Teresa are offering to him. Then Juan drives Little home, and on the road, Little has his hand out the window and he's doing that airplane thing where you glide your hand up and down with the flow of the wind.
Yeah.
Such a childlike and carefree act. And I thought, man, Little feels safe.
Love it. This is probably your ordeal or something that I'm about to say. I see this, I kind of have to talk about two other scenes that lead up to what I see as the true crossing of the threshold. Juan goes to check on his corner again, and he finds Paula, Little's mom, freebasing crack in her boyfriend's car. So we find out explicitly now that Juan is Paula's dealer, and we also find out that Paula suspects that her son is gay because she says to Juan,
You ever see the way he walk,
Juan,
You watch your damn mouth.
you gonna tell him why the other boys kick his ass all the time? Huh?
To me, the crossing of the threshold is Little goes to Juan's house again, and he asks him,
What's a faggot?
and the way Juan answers turned this movie 180 degrees from where I thought it was going.
Yeah.
Juan looks at Teresa, and I think, oh man, he's going to try to talk this kid out of it or toughen him up. And he just looks back at him and he says,
A faggot is a word used to make gay people feel bad.
you know, this movie could have been overplayed by almost every character in it. It could have been really milked and juiced because it's such an emotional movie. And every single person in this movie steps back and goes, what's right for the movie? And I've never seen another Barry Jenkins movie, but I have to assume he's an impeccable director of actors. They must have felt so safe to play it so minimally. So to me, that's where Little crosses the threshold into awareness. I think I'm gay. Because the next question is, how do I know? How do I know if I'm gay, essentially? And Juan says, you don't have to know right now. I saw that as crossing of the threshold because of the way the arc of this movie goes. It's really about this kid discovering and then reckoning with, in the context of the society he lives in and the community he lives in, being a gay person.
Yeah, that's great. And that's really the heart of what this film is about, what masculinity is. Of course, you've stopped just short of the next lines of dialogue, and I think maybe that's intentional on your part.
I wrote down the next line of dialogue and then I crossed it out because I felt like it takes it to a different place. When he asks Juan, do you sell drugs? And Juan says, yeah.
And my mom does drugs,
And
right?
my mom does drugs, right.
A little atonement with the father, almost. It's the only father figure that Little has, and he is responsible for the trouble that his mother is in.
Yeah. Again, there are no simple characters. Juan is a very problematic father figure. Mm-hmm. We see all this good guy stuff intermixed with he's a drug dealer.
Yeah.
Not only is he a drug dealer, he's the drug dealer that sells Chiron's mom her drugs. And she even has this confrontational scene with him where she says,
You gonna raise my son? Yeah. That's what I thought.
You gonna raise him?
You gonna keep selling me rocks? Huh? Don't give me that. You gotta get it from somewhere. I'm getting it from you.
well, should we take a break and come back with Act 2?
Yes.
Sounds good. We are live here at Studio Z in beautiful Burbank, California. Dan, what are you watching? What are you reading? What are you playing?
Let's see. I've read a book called The Billionaire's Vinegar for this wine-themed book club that I'm a part of.
What a great title.
It is a good title.
It's a great title.
It's an interesting story, again, just similar to the last one that I read, In Vino Duplicitis. It's about the corruption of the rare wine market. Just baffling, the amount of money that people spend on this stuff. I also listened to the audiobook of a novel called A Call to Duty, which is book one of a sci-fi series called Manticore Ascendant, written by David Weber and Timothy Zahn.
Ooh, I know that name.
Timothy Zahn, you might know from back when we were in high school. He wrote a trilogy of Star Wars books.
It was Heir to the Empire?
Heir to the
Yeah.
Empire, yeah, which introduced this villain named Thrawn that I think the Star Wars fan base really loved. And I think a lot of people thought if there was going to be another Star Wars trilogy of films, that certainly would be good source material to go by.
What a diplomatic way of saying that, Dan.
Didn't happen, but I don't know how I feel about the book. It was kind of middle of the road for me. Based on the blurb on the book, it's supposed to be about a 17-year-old kid who he's got kind of a wrecked home life, and he is looking for some discipline and order and structure in his life. So he joins the Royal Manticoran Navy with the hope that they will give him what he needs. And he goes through boot camp, and then his first posting is this slapdash crew, and it just doesn't satisfy him. And then the story starts to move forward, and then stuff happens. But the stuff doesn't happen until the last quarter of the book. I picked it up because I thought maybe this could be a hero's journey contender, but there are dozens of other characters that come in and out. Politicians and the king and the cabinet and
Big political structure.
It's this big ensemble cast. So I think it wasn't what it was advertised to be. So I don't know if I'm going to continue the series or not. But the last quarter of the book was great. The big adventure at the end.
So it makes you wonder, will the next book be more like the last quarter, or will it be more drudgery?
Yeah, I don't know. There's so many other books that I need to
Yeah.
read. My bookshelves are overflowing. What have you been doing?
Well, on the playing front, we had been playing Dying Light, and then one night we got together for an online game and I got this horrible error message, and it turns out there was an update for my version that's a known issue that disallows you to play with other like network games. And so like I reinstalled it and I uninstalled Steam and I lost all my save game stuff and nothing worked. So I haven't played video games much. Other than Moonlight, I haven't really seen any other movies. I'm trying to catch up on This Is Us with my wife, and I'm up to speed on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is my other favorite TV show. I have read a couple of books. I listened to the audiobook of Desperation by Stephen King, which was one of his novels in the 90s, and he reads the audiobook, and I love hearing him read stuff, so I got it. I liked it. It was 4 out of 5 stars on Audible, which surprised me because it's definitely not in my top 5 Stephen King books.
Okay.
But it's interesting. It's a small town in western Nevada where people driving through get sucked into this horror nightmare, and it's a lot of murder, and it turns out it's because of this demonic presence that's been buried in the mine for 100 years. So it ended well. It ended up being more than I expected. But the first half of the book was meeting all these characters and how they happened to be in this situation, and I just wanted to get to the scary stuff.
Did you read The Regulators as well?
No, it's same world as that book.
Right.
It's connected.
It's the same characters, too. The Regulators is a Richard Bachman book.
Okay. I will definitely read that one as well because I'm working my way through the whole catalog.
Richard Bachman, for those who don't know, was Stephen King's pseudonym.
Right.
I remember when I was in college, I worked at a bookstore, the Bookstar.
Yes.
And I got a phone call one night, and I answered the phone, and they said, "Do you have It by Richard Bachman?" And
oops.
And I said, "Well, yes, but It is by Stephen King." And they said, "Oh, really? Like, I thought it was Richard Bachman." And I said, "Well, Richard Bachman is Stephen King's pseudonym." And in the background, I hear, "Ha! I effing told you!" And then they hung up. So they had an argument, and they called the bookstore and like tricked me into confirming what.
The internet has destroyed all of those kind of arguments.
Yeah.
Like when you're sitting in a bar with somebody, no, that was such a, you just open up the IMDb app or whatever
right.
and immediately. But man, that's funny. All the joys of book selling.
I don't do that anymore.
That's funny. When I worked at Blockbuster Music for a brief period in college, I would have people come in and go, "What? There's this song and it goes like this," and they'd sing it, and then all the clerks would be like, "Hey, do you know that song? Oh, is that the one that goes like that?" And you'd have a conversation, and then you'd dig into the crappy database at the store and try to find if you had it. And now it's just Shazam or whatever. But it's funny how those ways of finding information are just gone.
Yeah.
All right, so I did read 2 books. I read Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan, which I absolutely adored. It's about this sort of computer guy, web designer / data visualization expert who loses his job at a startup and ends up working at this weird bookstore that's open 24 hours a day and doesn't seem to have any customers. And it turns out it's one of the satellite stations of this international book cult that he has stumbled into. And using his data skills, he sort of figures out how the cult works. And it just becomes this really cool, quiet mystery thriller that totally wasn't what I expected. And I loved it. I highly, highly recommend it.
Okay.
So
did you read that, or was it an Audible?
I read the book as a book.
Right.
It was somebody had given it to me. But I'm on a mission to read books that I own, and that was one that I've been dying to get to. So I highly recommend that one.
Cool. All right. Is it time to get into Act 2 now?
Yeah, I guess we have to go back to work.
My least favorite part of the show.
Wah, wah. Act 2 begins with tests, allies, and enemies, or as Mr. Campbell calls it, the road of trials. Now in the special world, our hero makes allies, meets enemies, and must pass a series of tests to prove his worthiness.
And here we are, that horrible nebulous segment of where do tests end and approach the inmost cave begin.
Right, we've already...
So let's tread carefully.
I've already stepped on some of your tests in my prior elements. So here we are.
Who are the allies?
Well, I want to say real quick that this movie is divided into 3 sections by title cards. Section 1 is called Little. Section 2 is called Chiron. Section 3 is called Black. Those are the nicknames or names of the main character. as we go through. And it's kind of like one section of this movie will end, you'll get a couple scenes, and then you'll get the title card. So it was a very interesting way to split up this film. And as I was analyzing it, I actually saw the act structure really dividing that way too, as Act 1 being Little, his 9 to 12-year-old self, Act 2 being Chiron at 16, and then Act 3 being Black in his 20s. With that said, Chiron is now 16, but he's as much of a fish out of water in high school as he was in elementary school. So if we're going to do allies, enemies, and tests, I guess here's my pitch for allies. It's slim pickings.
Yeah.
Teresa,
Yes.
who was Juan's girlfriend, who kind of was a surrogate mother to Chiron, is his ally. We find out Juan has died. We don't know how. And then the other ally I have listed as an ally-ish is Kevin.
Yeah, he's a shapeshifter. I feel like not really of his own accord, though. He's forced into the act that he takes at the end of this segment.
It's probably worth saying that the main thrust of this movie takes place in the late 80s, early to mid 90s, or somewhere thereabouts.
Right.
And so I think being gay isn't as acceptable in that period as it is now. And then there's this whole other added layer of how the African American community in Miami, in this neighborhood, handles that conversation 20 years ago. Enemies, the main enemy in Act 2 is Terrell, who's his new bully.
Yes, very effective.
Oh, man.
That actor, Patrick DeSille.
He is so great in that role. The hardest thing in a movie or screenplay to me is humanizing your antagonist. So I had him as my only enemy, really, other than Chiron himself being an internal enemy.
Yeah, Paula, Chiron's mother, I don't know that she's really an enemy. She's an antagonist through the first two segments of this film.
Yeah, I would buy that.
But not because she is evil-hearted.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The tests, the road of trials, here are the bullet points that I had. Kevin is back as a teenager, and he brags to Chiron at the beginning of this segment about his sexual exploits with a girl in their class. It's actually a really funny piece of dialogue. And that night, Chiron has an erotic dream, and Kevin's in it. And to me, this is a failed test because Chiron is not ready to honor his sexual identity. His true feelings can only be expressed in his dreams. The next test, Chiron's mom is high and she kicks him out for the night, and he goes to Teresa, and Teresa puts him up for the night. And that's when we find out definitively that Juan is dead. The next morning, when he goes home, his mom, Paula, hits him up for money.
I need some money.
For what?
That's my business. Don't you ask me no like that.
I don't have no money.
No, don't lie to me, boy. I'm your mama. That bitch over there ain't no Kenia. I'm your blood, remember?
It's this really ugly scene where you see Paula's jealousy of him as her son, and she knows that she's a screw-up and that Teresa's not, and she's angry about it, and she's desperate. Chiron gives her the money, and I saw this as another test that he fails. He could have stood up to his mother, and he did not.
Yeah, he enabled her. I want to call out the makeup department because it is clear that her complexion is beginning to degrade. Her teeth in earlier scenes, especially the one when Juan confronts Paula, at some point she smiles, and I thought, wow, she's got a beautiful smile. Mm-hmm. In the second segment of the film, her teeth are starting to yellow, and her complexion is degrading. It was very subtle and effective, and I just wanted to call out the hair and makeup department.
Great.
For that work that they did.
Totally. And the first time we see her in this segment is a super close-up on her face in bright daylight. You see her in glorious 5K resolution, full screen, and you're right, she looks messed up. That's the end of my test phase.
Really?
Yep.
Me too.
No way!
Are you kidding?
No, I'm not.
You gotta be kidding.
That's the end of tests.
Wow.
Somebody write down the date. It's Earth Day. We're recording this on Earth Day.
Time is 11:59 a.m. So at this point, now we slide into the segment Approach to the Inmost Cave, where the hero reaches the edge of a dangerous place where the object of his quest is hidden. Even though we agreed on where the end of the tests phase is, I continue to struggle with my interpretation of what the approach to the cave really is.
Yeah.
To do that analysis successfully, you have to decide first what the object of the quest is.
Yeah, what the ordeal is.
Before you can decide the road up to it.
Agreed.
As we've been going through this discussion here today, I believe I have solidified my thought that it is Chiron's identity, that is the object of the quest.
I thought the goal was those really awesome gold teeth that he gets in the third act. You're telling me no, it's some identity thing? No, I agree with you 100%. His identity as a fully expressed human being who happens to be gay,
right?
That's the goal.
And the tormenting that he endures from Terrell and Terrell's friends. All of these little moments, particularly there's one where Chiron is walking home from school and he's approached by Terrell and one of his friends. During the scene, Terrell provokes Chiron, calling his mother essentially a prostitute, suggesting that she sells sex for drug money. When they realize, hey, you live over that way. You're headed down this road. You're going to Teresa's house. And he says, hey, does she give head for free or does she sell it like Paula? Trying to bait Chiron into a fight. And Chiron almost gets there. He starts to talk back. When he's then confronted by Terrell, he backs down again. And he says, oh, whatever, man. And he starts to walk away. And he's starting to shrink in on himself. He's turning his shoulder toward Terrell. There's this physical representation of him shrinking.
Yeah.
And I thought that was part of the approach. His attempt to stand up for himself.
I have exactly the same thing. The only thing that I wanted to express in this section that I feel you didn't necessarily express was that the reason to me this is the approach, the reason this is the setting of the sun before the dark night is Terrell has Chiron's life pegged.
Yes.
You're gay, your mom's a crack whore, and you get all your love from some other woman who doesn't have anything to do with you.
Yes.
And he's, in a cruel way, fairly accurate, except for the stuff about him being sexually involved with Teresa or whatever. But he's got Chiron's life pegged. And he and this other kid are like, if you disagree with me, I will you up physically. And Chiron has nowhere to go. He either fights the guy for the sake of fighting him or goes away. And you're right, he shrinks away. And you can see burning in his eyes at the end of that scene, I'm either going to die and just suffer being this miserable person, or I'm going to honor this rage that you can see burning inside of him. And I totally agree. That's the approach. That's the last step before something's going to blow up.
The rest of that night, Chiron is sleeping in the metro station, and he's distraught and lonely and just trying to figure stuff out, and he's kind of wandering the city at night. He then decides, where was the last place that I felt confident? So he goes to the beach, where Juan taught him how to swim, and told him, you need to figure out who you are.
Which brings us to
the ordeal.
He gets to the beach, and Kevin shows up.
Yeah.
And they share a joint. It's this sweet, uncomfortable scene as these two dudes, kind of macho Kevin, who's got lots of swag, and painfully quiet Chiron, they say everything to each other except how they feel.
Right.
It's this great scene of dialogue. That's how
even a
people
discussion
talk.
About Chiron, he admits how much he cries.
Yeah.
And an over macho teenage boy would have mocked Chiron. Kevin doesn't do that.
No.
He's there for Chiron.
And he also says something about the breeze.
That breeze feel good as hell, man.
Yeah, it do.
Sometimes around the way where we live, you can catch that same breeze. Just come through the hood and it's like everything stopped for a second because everyone just want to feel it. Everything just gets quiet, you know?
And it's like all you can hear is your own heartbeat, right?
Yeah, feels so good, man.
So good.
So he's being poetic and vulnerable in his own way.
Yes.
So finally they kiss, and they end up having not just a kiss, but an erotic encounter. You see it coming, but it's still surprising and so tender and awkward and uncomfortable in all the ways that teenage encounters are. When it's over, that shot where Kevin spreads his hand across the sand, that is maybe the most surprising shot in a film I've seen in recent memory.
Why?
Well, first of all, you never deal with the aftermath of sex in a movie. It's always cut to the next morning, and you never deal with people have bad breath, or people or it gets on the sheets.
Okay.
And so he addressed this the physical aftermath of that encounter in a way that was beautiful and symbolic and grounded to the earth and had everything to do with the ocean and the tidal. And I was so moved by something that could have been so gross. And I did not see it coming, and it surprised me that you would even address it. Because everything else about that scene, it's shot from behind, so you can't really see what's going on, but you see his hand is in his lap, and it's very tastefully done. And then to be that explicit with it was like, And it's clearly he's not disgusted. He's just, that's how he's dealing with it.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
beautiful.
Chiron even apologizes, and Kevin says, "You've got nothing to be sorry for."
Yeah. Another thing to note is that during this encounter, Kevin calls Chiron Black. And he's called him this before in the dream, and I think in one of the first scenes in the Chiron section.
Yes.
And it's a nickname, and we don't know where or why he got it. So to me, this scene expresses two elements of Campbell's hero's journey. And they're segments that sort of reveal the heteronormativity of Joseph Campbell writing in the early 20th century. The meeting with the goddess. The ultimate adventure when all the barriers and ogres have been overcome is commonly represented as a mystical marriage. So here's that union of two people who love each other.
Yeah.
And also the woman as temptress, which is about the hero's loss of innocence when life has become intolerable. And that's certainly where Chiron is.
Sure is.
So I think the ordeal continues, and I'm wondering if you agree with me. Let me go on.
It ends when Kevin drops him off. Then the vengeful forces stand up.
Wait, you're going to road back already?
No. There's the ordeal. The ultimate boon is next. And then by the time Chiron gets home, then that's the road back.
I still see this next thing that I'm about to talk about as part of the ordeal.
Okay.
Terrell bullies Kevin into playing a game called Knockdown Stay Down, which they talk about having played in middle school. So in the schoolyard later, Terrell points out Chiron and says to Kevin, "That's your target. Knock him down and get him to stay down." And you can see Kevin struggling because Kevin is clearly either gay or bi himself. But he's managed to stay in the cool side or the accepted side with his machismo and his bragging about his sexual exploits with women. And he can tell at this point that Terrell is saying, beat him up or you're going to be on the wrong side of me. And so Kevin approaches Chiron and starts a fight with him. He gets up in his face and you see him struggling for a minute. He doesn't just walk up to him and deck him. There's a moment where they look face to face and Chiron puts his chin up like,
yeah,
if you're going to do it, you got to do it. And Kevin hauls back and just whack and knocks him down. But this is that moment. Chiron doesn't stay down.
Right.
He gets back up and he's looking at him like, if you're going to hit me, you got to hit me. So Kevin does. He beats the snot out of him. And when he stops, Terrell and his homies kick him and kick him and kick him until he's really, really messed up. I see two elements of Campbell in here. I see atonement with the father. Campbell's description of atonement is the hero confronting whoever holds the ultimate power in his or her life. And, Juan, his father figure, had told him that he had to decide for himself who he's going to be. And Chiron makes the decision. So I see that as part of the ordeal.
I disagree, but my disagreement is in the next section, or in the next act.
Okay, so what's reward seizing the sword for you?
The ultimate boon, the reward, having faced his worst fear, the hero seizes the object of his quest. The self-realization that he feels after the intimate encounter with Kevin on the beach. Kevin gives Chiron a ride home, and they have this little talk about, you've never done anything like that before. Chiron gets out of the car, and they clasp hands. Kevin extends his right hand, which is the hand that he used to pleasure Chiron on the beach. And
interesting.
Chiron looks, this is a very pointed moment where he looks at Kevin's hand.
Yeah.
And then he clasps it. And then he leaves, and he's walking very slowly, almost lazily, to his apartment, where he's probably remembering the moment at the beach. And he walks into the apartment, and his eyes are closed, and he's got the smile on his face. And I interpreted that as him feeling like, this feels right. I understand that this is me now. He's not repulsed by it. He doesn't feel like, oh my God, what have I just done? And neither does Kevin.
Interesting.
The reward was self-realization.
I agree that the reward is self-realization, and I certainly recognize that there are some of the elements of the hero's journey are expressed in a look or a shot or a moment in a scene in this movie.
Yeah.
But that's not what I saw as the seizing the sword.
I will agree with you that when in the next section, Chiron standing tall and letting Kevin beat him, that was part of that new confidence in who he is that resulted in him responding to Kevin at school in that way.
Reward seizing the sword is having faced his worst fear, the hero seizes the object of his quest. To me, the double whammy here is having faced his worst fear and then seizing. I agree that in that moment after he has the encounter with Kevin and he's walking home, he realizes or he feels that sense of self-realization, but I don't think he has seized it. after he gets his ass kicked by Terrell and his buddies, the principal's trying to get Sharon to rat out Terrell and his boys, and he won't. There's some internal honor that he's got. We don't know. So after his encounter with Kevin, Sharon goes back to school and he walks into class.
Yep.
And he picks up a chair and he breaks it over Terrell's head, just smashes it. Terrell not even paying attention. He's talking to his friend, joking around, doesn't see it coming. So this is not about showing off to Terrell. This is an act of pure dominance. And then Kevin watches as Sharon is taken away in a police cruiser. The ultimate boon here is his winning that conflict, his announcing to everyone, I will not be a victim. Because anybody else in that classroom that had something to say to Sharon just saw how it got dealt with. It's a very public display. He doesn't go to Terrell's house and stab him in the night. He walks into class. And it's, as we see him become black, to me, this is that moment when he thinks he is choosing who he wants to be. And Act 3 is still to come. But to me, this is him going, I know who I'm going to be. I'm going to be the guy that fights back. Crack with the chair. So to me, that was him seizing the sword.
Yes, that is certainly a valid addition.
Well, should we take a break and continue our discussion after a little beverage? Yeah, sure.
A refreshing brew of some sort?
Or a distilled spirit. I don't know, because I haven't seen inside the bag yet.
Beverage break.
From Lagunitas Brewing in Petaluma, California, Dark Swan Sour Ale.
So I thought, because this movie is about the development of a young boy into a man who is confident in, kind of like Ugly Duckling to the Swan.
Yeah. Oh, hey, this is interesting. The bottle says, observers of yestercentury denied the existence of the dark swan, insisting the species was confined to a singular snowy hue. Explorers eventually contradicted that misconception, astonishing the world and casting light upon the dark. This beer may well do the same. This is Dan has a new. It's a crowbar.
There you go.
Oh, here we go. A crowbar bottle opener. Cheers. That's sour.
How do you generally feel about sours? I hated the very first one I ever had.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Go ahead. I keep interrupting you.
I was gonna say I've had two before this and never enjoyed them. But I'm gonna try another sip here. There's something berry-ish about it, like
blackberries.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm thinking more raspberry.
Okay.
There's some tartness to it, so
Yeah.
I'm thinking raspberry. Yeah, I used to not like sours. I thought they were really gross, but I had one a couple years ago, or maybe a year ago, that I think the planets were aligned just right.
It opened your mind to
Yeah,
sours.
and then so I started trying them every now and then.
The other thing this bottle says is, life is uncertain, don't sip, which thematically matches.
Yeah.
So there's a lot about this bottle that coincides with the story in a beautiful way. And I am not going to sip it. I am going to take gulps, because apparently that's how you're supposed to taste it. All right, we're going to drink our Dark Swan Sour Ale from Lagunitas, and we'll be back with Act 3.
Act 3 begins with the road back, where the hero is pursued by vengeful forces that he disturbed when he seized the sword. Your discussion at the end of Act 2 surpassed the point that I feel was the road back, which is this. Chiron returns home after his intimate encounter on the beach with Kevin. He's happy, he's content. The first thing that he sees when he gets home is his mother on the couch, sleeping, and he's putting a blanket on her, which I thought was a very caring and loving thing to do for somebody who doesn't show him much love and caring at all.
That's a great moment in the movie. You really see his compassion for her. Like, she's not just a villain to him. She is his mom, and he does want to take care of her.
And she wakes up and says, "You don't love me anymore. You're my only, and I'm your only. You don't love me anymore." And then she falls back asleep. But this is a reminder to Chiron that he's not allowed to be happy. That's how I saw that scene.
Oh, interesting.
That this is the first of two vengeful forces that come after Chiron. The second is the next day at school, the beating. Terrell forces Kevin, the other participant of the intimate encounter, to physically assault Chiron. I saw Terrell and his friends as a vengeful force, telling both Kevin and Chiron that what they just did is not acceptable.
I see that.
Now, where my thought starts to crack a bit is Did Terrell somehow know? The first time I watched the film, when Terrell approaches Kevin in the lunchroom and he starts talking about this game they used to play, Knock Down, Stay Down, and how Kevin used to be good at it, and then Terrell says, yeah, but N-words don't do that anymore.
Right.
And he's looking at Kevin, and I felt like the words that are coming out of his mouth are about this beat people up game they used to play in school. But what he's really talking about is the relationship between Kevin and Chiron.
I didn't see that. I don't know if I agree that somehow Terrell knew, but I don't think you need that for it to be vengeful forces. I think in a movie like this, even in life, people sense a change or they sense a disturbance in the force, if you will, and they fight against it. You know, he might have sensed that Kevin was not being hard enough, or that he, for whatever reason, sensed that Kevin was a way to get to Chiron.
Why that day?
Right.
Why Kevin? Anybody else that he could have chosen to beat up Chiron, he chose Kevin. And I said one of two. It's really one of three vengeful forces. When Chiron is in the principal's office and the principal is saying, you need to press charges or there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
And she keeps calling him boy. And Chiron says, I'm not a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And the principal says, yeah, you are. If you were a man, there'd be four other knuckleheads sitting right next to you. So this is a reminder, Chiron, you may feel different now. You may feel like a man, but you're not. You're still a child. That's how I saw that scene with the principal.
Oh, I saw that as the principal just trying to get at who did this to you so I can enforce the laws of the school, essentially. You know,
yes, that is literally what she was saying. But if I'm looking for symbolism,
I don't get how that's a vengeful force. What happened in the seizing the sword that stirred that up?
Just his new sense of self and telling the principal, I'm no boy.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Got it.
And she says, yeah, you are.
Yeah, I can get that. I can get those as vengeful forces. I can totally see.
Those are the only ones that I saw.
Yeah, no,
those are the expressions of, here's this event that Chiron has experienced, and now here are three things that knock him back down again immediately following.
Well, I have a feeling that we're going to be out of step here until the end of the third act, so I'll dive in with my road back.
Yes.
I thought Jenkins did a really good job of delineating the three acts with his three parts. Little, Chiron, and Black. And so in keeping with that, we now move into part 3 of the film, which is Chiron now goes by Black, the nickname that Kevin gave him 10 years ago. And now he's a drug dealer, and he's ripped and stone cold. He's now the bully. He's the guy messing with guys and getting them to do what he wants and running the streets and making the money. He's in charge. He is the kid who hit Terrell over the head with the chair. This, monstrous figure, essentially.
Yeah. You notice when he drives his car, he's very laid back about it. He's overconfident.
Yeah. Also, Juan had this little crown on his dashboard.
Right.
And he's got that crown now. I took that to mean that he has embraced, if Juan had two sides, the good father and the drug-dealing aggressor, Black/Chiron has decided that the only way he can survive the world is becoming that aggressor, not the gentle, loving, understanding father.
Okay.
So the vengeful forces, and I'll admit this is a metaphorical stretch of vengeful forces, out of the blue, after 10 years, Kevin calls Black. Reaching out from the past, he apologizes for what happened when they were 16 and invites him to come back to Miami and visit him at the diner where he works and says he'll cook for him. So here's this thing that 10 years ago, Chiron ended it, buried it, went to prison. He's moved to a different state. He's in Georgia now. He's changed his life completely. Here's this force, this romantic force that he stirred up in that romantic encounter with Kevin that is coming back to interrupt the constructed life that he has now. So Black goes to sleep that night.
That's not a vengeful force. I see what you're getting at, but I don't see how it's a vengeful force in relation to the ordeal and the ultimate boon. What do you feel the ultimate boon is?
I think we agree on what the ultimate boon is, which is coming to terms with the fact that he's a gay man.
The fact that he has rebuilt himself into this different persona, and Kevin calling him a decade later.
But the way he came to terms with it was by rejecting it completely and running away from it. He says in Act 3,
"You're the only man that's ever touched me. You're the only one. I haven't really touched anyone since."
Unlike the traditional narrative of the hero who embraces his superpower, he refuses that crossing of the threshold. he does not go on to live the life of a self-expressed gay man. He goes the other way toward this sort of toxically masculine, dark figure. And so the forces that he stirred during the ordeal were these romantic connection feelings, and those come back to haunt him. And in the,
I hear you.
We talked about, the mystical marriage and the woman is temptress. He rejects all that stuff. And I think essentially this is a coming of age story and a love story. And in a love story, the object of love can often be an antagonistic force. Now, I don't claim to think that this is some kind of romance story. I don't know that Chiron and Kevin end up together at the end of the story and that they live happily ever after. But Kevin is, for all intents and purposes, the force pushing back on Chiron's unwillingness to wrap his mind and his heart around the fact that he's gay. So, just for the sake of continuing, Kevin calls Black out of the blue, and all of a sudden, all these things are awakened, and Black awakens from another erotic dream. We don't see the dream, and it's because Kevin called, and we know, here are those stirrings again. He couldn't escape them. And so, there's this concept in Campbell, crossing of the return threshold, where the hero's crossed into the special world, accomplished something, some great task. He's seized otherworldly knowledge, and now his challenge is to bring it back into the real world. Well, Chiron sees control of this otherworldly knowledge that he's in control of his own life. But like Juan said, he can decide who he wants to be. But he's used that knowledge to kind of become a bully. And now at Kevin's invitation, he decides to investigate the possibility of another kind of life, a life where he can be true to his secret self. So that's that crossing of the return threshold. Resurrection. The hero is purified by death, either in a literal or symbolic way, and returns to the land of the living, a changed person. So I see two resurrections in this third act. The first one is Black visits his mother in rehab, and she tells him she loves him, and he cries. He's moved by her in a way he hasn't been in our presence for this whole movie.
Yeah.
And so their loving relationship is reborn. We see a little bit of it at the beginning when she, like you said, she cares about him and she's sober and she's like, you can't watch TV, you got to come home when you're meant to be home.
Right.
And now here again, she's expressing her love and she apologizes and comes clean. I know I screwed up a lot of things. Yes. And she asks about Teresa, not in a angry, jealous way, but in a way that acknowledges that she's been an important person in his life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the other resurrection is Black goes to see Kevin at the diner, and Kevin cooks for him. Here he reconnects with his old life. He resurrects a friendship that died over a decade ago.
Right.
That scene at the diner, his reconnect with Kevin, is the last 35 minutes of that movie. It's
a long scene.
It's incredibly, and it's funny because I was looking through the screenplay. I'm like, wow, I can't name another movie where essentially an extended dialogue scene between two characters is the third act. I mean, that scene lasts 35 minutes. But that beginning of that scene where he first gets back to the diner and they start joking around again. And Kevin, he's always been the one that's ahead of Black or ahead of Chiron in that relationship. And he starts kind of teasing him like...
he was the cool one. And...
Yeah.
And you go with that damn nodding again, man. You ain't changed one damn bit. You still can't say more than 3 words at a time, huh?
Said you was gonna cook for me. You know I say that.
Yeah, I did say that, didn't I? You don't look like your ass been missing no meals. Yeah. I got you, man. Sit down.
That friendship that was so precious and tender is back.
Not without its difficulties. Kevin is not at all happy to hear that Chiron is a drug dealer.
Right.
And he doesn't like the gold fronts that he's wearing on his teeth. He doesn't like this.
But Kevin has been pushing back against who Chiron is since their first scene together.
Right.
I still see that as the... like you and I have had ups and downs in our friendship, but we've always maintained the same roles. We kind of nudge each other and push each other. This is the rebirth of that friendship. Whatever its dynamics are, it's been dead for 10 years. They haven't spoken.
Yeah.
Black could have ignored Kevin's phone call.
Yeah. That scene is resurrection for me. That whole diner scene. I kind of interpreted that as it's the final battle. Maybe I'm about to jump into your freedom to live, and I apologize.
No, do it.
The song that he plays on the jukebox, Hello Stranger by Barbara Lewis, which is when Kevin calls Chiron, he says, I was thinking about you because this guy came into the restaurant and he played a song on the jukebox. It made me think of you. I don't know. I hear songs that remind me of people that I knew, and I don't call them up.
Well, and the funny thing is...
I didn't have any encounters on the beach with those folks either. So
Had Black asked what song was it, it would have been so clear that Kevin still held a flame because the lyrics are so on the nose. In fact, in the script, Barry Jenkins even says, he walks to the jukebox, he puts on the song and hear the lyrics, and he goes, and it's on the nose, but it. This is what reminded him. And that's is
in
what
the
made
script?
him call. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
You know, when you read a screenplay that's written by the person who knows they're going to direct it, it's totally different. And this screenplay is so beautiful and poetic and well written. So yeah, I'll buy
absolutely.
that song as part of the resurrection for sure.
And the final segment is Freedom to Live, or Return with the Elixir. The hero, having won some special treasure or reward, now returns to the ordinary world to share the spoils of battle. So after the diner, Chiron gives Kevin a ride home to his apartment, which is on the beach. And they go inside and they have this conversation about self and who are you? Who have you been the last 10 years? And that's when Chiron tells Kevin that he's the only man who's ever touched him.
Yeah.
There's this moment where Kevin looks at Chiron and there's like maybe a little smile and maybe not, and then there's a smile and you see the machinations of his brain, and this moment where Kevin realizes that they both have been carrying a torch for each other.
Yeah.
Because if not, why would Chiron have even said that?
Yeah.
You just skip that part of the conversation. But that was Chiron saying, I'm still open to this. And I think Kevin's smile at the end is a confirmation that he is too.
Yeah.
Cut to the two of them cuddling, and the final shot of the film is Little.
Mm-hmm.
Alex Hibbert as the young Chiron, standing on the beach at night. His shoulders are square. He's standing straight up. His head is up.
Yeah.
And he turns around and he looks back at the camera. His eyes are up. He looks confident for the first time. You've never seen Little look like that before.
Yeah. The second to last shot isn't just Kevin holding Chiron. It's Kevin holding Chiron's head in exactly the same way his hand was on it at their beach scene in Act 2. It's absolutely a callback to that moment. And that last shot from the movie of Little standing on the beach looking back at the camera, and he looks blue in the moonlight.
Yeah.
It's clearly moonlit.
Yeah.
So I went and I reread the last page of the shooting script, and Jenkins wrote, he looks back, his dark skin moistened in the ocean spray, moon catching him, same as it's catching the surface of the Atlantic, and those eyes looking right at us, staring plaintively, plainly, nothing requested, no expectation, just a clear, undisturbed openness. Hold this gaze, then, and this is where the movie cuts to black, with Little looking back at us, but the script continues, Little turning from us, his form and movement slowly, steadily melding into the flow of light and waves as he heads out into the ocean and we fade to black. So the script has a more definitive ending. It gives us more closure. Little has committed to the man he wants to be. He's walking into the ocean to swim. I wonder, because I would have liked that ending even more. It's such an unusual, disjointed movie. I would have loved to see Little turn around and head into the ocean. I wonder what happened in the editing.
Really?
Yeah, I wonder why Jenkins decided to end it on a more inconclusive note, where he's looking back at us, and it's almost like the movie ends with a question mark.
I will posit that during the scene where Kevin and Chiron are on the beach at the end of Act 2, and Chiron is talking about how much he cries.
Should I cry so much sometimes? I feel like I'm gonna just turn to drops.
You just roll out into the water, right? Roll out into the water like all these other motherfuckers around here trying to drown their sorrows.
Based on that line, if we see Little turn around and walk into the water, that would be ambiguous. It would be not confident Little. It could maybe be
He's trying to drown his sorrows.
Little going into the water to drown his sorrows.
Yeah, solid point. I can see that. So maybe he realized that when he was editing, I can't end it the way I wrote it. People might think it's him drowning his sorrows.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I like it better that way anyway.
How do you know?
Personally.
You don't know because you haven't seen it both ways.
I know, but based on what you described when you read the script.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add, or?
No, I guess this movie took me by surprise in so many ways, and I guess I feel like the movies that have won Best Picture historically since I've started to care about movies have been. I mean, I always think of like The English Patient and movies like that, to where they're emotionally moving and they're well made, but they lack some bravery or some willingness to fail. For the most part, they've been safe movies. You know, you think about Titanic, movies like that. And this movie was such It was so brave. It was so different from other movies that have won Best Picture, and it was such a triumphant piece of art that I just didn't expect it to be as unusual as it was, and I loved it.
Agreed. Yeah, I was surprised that I liked it as much as I did. I don't know that I expected to not like it. I just didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
Except that it had won Best Picture in a bizarre, controversial moment at the Oscars.
And by the way, I loved La La Land. This movie is better than La La Land. Like, there's no question this movie is better than La La Land.
I have not seen La La Land.
And now I understand why they could be. La La Land's
great. Are we
great.
doing La La Land next?
I don't know. I feel like that's glorious. La La Land's great, but it's like, it's not even the same class as this movie. La La Land was fun entertainment that touched you. This was art.
Ooh.
I don't know what the difference is, but I know I like it.
That's it for this episode. Join us next month when we'll be analyzing
the 1996 Nicolas Cage, Sean Connery action epic, The Rock.
I hope you're on board with this one, Jeff. I really enjoy The Rock. It is so much fun.
I hate Michael Bay, but I love this movie, and we're doing it.
This was before Michael Bay was Michael Bay.
Okay.
This was his second film. He did Bad Boys and then The Rock.
If you like what you heard, please go subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you love what you've heard, please leave us a rating and a review and tell your friends to listen.
Thanks to Taylor Jordan for our amazing Heroes Journey fanfare and bumper music. Check him out at dramatics.net. To Dean Ethington at DAE Design for our logo. And to Lagunitas Brewery for this delicious Dark Swan Sour Ale that I liked, even though I was not looking forward to it.
Really?
I just was sour.
Sour. Moonlight is copyright 2016. Dos Hermanos LLC.
Was it really Dos Hermanos?
Yeah.
Oh. I guess I'm thinking of the chicken restaurant from
from Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad.
No.
We are proud to be a part of the 1888 Center family of podcasts. 1888 serves as a regional catalyst for the preservation, presentation, and promotion of cultural heritage and literary arts.
You can visit the center's cafe, gallery, and bookshop physically in historic downtown Orange, California, or online at 1888.center.
Follow us on Twitter at Heroes Podcast, like us at facebook.com/Heroes Journey Podcast, and check out our hilarious and informative show notes at heroesjourneypodcast.com.
Until next time,
journey on.